Our next guest is the president of the Republican State Leadership Committee, Austin Chambers. He'll be interviewed by the Hill's national reporter, Reed Wilson. Reed, throw it to you. Hey, Reed, I think your mic is muted.
Sorry about that, Bob.
That's okay. Sometimes I'd like to have that button.
Right. Living in the age of Zoom, right? Well, hey, thanks for kicking it over. And Austin Chambers, president of the Republican State Leadership Committee, thanks for joining us today. We often pay attention. I mean, we're talking about the presidential race nonstop. We pay attention to Senate races and House races. Let's talk about these state legislative races. Why do these things matter? Why should people be paying attention?
Well, Reed, it's good to be on with you. Thanks for having us. Look, right now, everything's on the line in 2020, from the presidential race all the way down to the state house. Everything's on the line. And there are dozens of, there's 14 states across the country that are critical for us this year, where if we don't win these state house races, we're going to be locked out of power in Congress for at least the next decade. And no one in Washington draws their own map. So what we have to make sure of is that we win these state legislative races so that Republicans can control, have a chance to control Congress for the next decade, and we don't allow Nancy Pelosi to strengthen her grip on Congress.
Well, that's interesting. So the 2010 election, the last time redistricting was at stake, was a huge year for Republicans across the country. You drew maps that were able to ensure a Republican Congress for 8 solid years. I mean, dive into that redistricting a little more. In some of these states, what's the difference between being in a minority and being in the majority?
Yeah, when you look at all of the target states across the country, as few as 42 seats. 42 state legislative seats could swing Congress by as much as 136 seats. So that's the public estimates of the best case scenario Democrat map to the best case scenario Republican map, 42, 136. And when you look at some of these states, you've got 1 seat or 2 seat margins. You've got 3 seat margins. And, you know, in North Carolina, for example, you got a 4 and a 5 seat margin, a critical state for us. So it is as tight as it could possibly get. And it all comes down to, can Republicans hold on to these chambers and make sure that there's fair and accurate redistricting? If we do that, we got a shot at having power in Washington for the next decade. If not, we're going to be locked out of state policy power, and we're going to be locked out of Washington.
All right. You mentioned North Carolina there. What are some of the other states we need to be paying attention to?
Look, our main priorities right now are Texas, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Arizona. There's some others as well, but that's our focus right now, is if Republicans can win in those, not only is it important politically and from a state policy standpoint, but we'll be in a great shape for redistricting post-2020 census.
All right. A lot of the states you mentioned there are also the critical battleground states for the presidential contest, for the Senate races, the key Senate races that are up. How does that impact these state legislative races where, you know, a strong campaign might raise $100,000? How do you compete and make a difference when you're the 17th or 18th race on the ballot?
Yeah. Look, the national election certainly impacts us. And there's 115 districts across our target states that Donald Trump won in 2020, won in 2016, that he's likely going to win in 2020. And we need him to be successful in those so that we can win those districts down ballot. There's some places where we're going to have to win that the president might not do so well in, but having the president on the ballot is a great benefit for us in those target districts where we need to hold legislative majorities. And we need that enthusiasm. Those people who are coming out to vote for the president, we need them to go all the way down the ballot, voting for Republicans for Congress, for U.S. Senate, but then for their state and local elections as well.
You mentioned that President Trump is critical to those efforts here. How much then does it worry you that he's trailing Joe Biden by 10 or more points in some of these critical battleground states?
Look, we don't pay attention to the public polls. On Election Day 2016, he had a 99% chance of losing. He won. He won bigger than most people expected. And what you'll see is I think we're going to have that again in 2020. For us, we're focused on our target districts across the country, and the president is doing much better in those than he's doing in these media national polls. And I believe he's going to be successful. I believe that Republicans up and down the ticket are going to be successful. We saw last night the very best of the Republican Party, the very best of this country. We're going to continue to see that over the next 3 days. That's going to benefit not only the president, but it's going to benefit Republicans up and down the ballot as this contrast starts to play out between people who love this country and want to make it better and the other party that's just focused on defeating one president and share some disdain for this country that the rest of America just doesn't have.
We'll talk about some of those target districts. We talked to your counterpart at the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee last week, and she was talking about the seats that are in suburban areas, districts that basically cost Republicans the House of Representatives 2 years ago in 2018. What are some of the sort of archetype districts that you're targeting in those critical battleground states?
Look, it very much is those same suburban districts are going to make or break majorities this year in places all across the country. But then when you look at some states like Iowa, Pennsylvania, critical places we need to hold, there's also some great pickup opportunities in rural districts where Democrats are still holding on, but have become out of touch with the people they're representing. The National Party has completely drifted away from average America and from middle America, and they've become really an inner city urban party. And there's a lot of opportunity that exists not only for Republicans to win in the suburbs, but to flip those rural seats that we should have flipped a few years ago.
Mm-hmm. How is the coronavirus pandemic changing the way your campaigns actually operate? I mean, we're used to, in these state legislative races where just a few thousand votes can make a difference. I mean, that's where people doorbell. That's where people do these in-person meetings. You can't do that right now. How are your candidates actually campaigning?
Look, we've got candidates across the country who've done a great job adapting to the circumstances before them, whether it's, doing Zoom town halls or doing telephone town halls or, hosting virtual meetups. Those are the things they were doing over the last several months. But we've also got a lot of candidates now who are adapting to safely getting back out and knocking on doors, safely holding small functions to make sure that, the proper protocols are in place. We know that we can't run campaigns from basements. We can't stay separated for forever. And it's important that we get back out and start engaging with people one-on-one. And in a lot of these legislative majorities, like you just said, these races will be decided by, a couple hundred votes. And in some of these places where we've got 3, 4, 5 seat majorities, a couple thousand votes will determine if we have the majority or the minority. And I think door knocking and person-to-person contact, now getting back to that, is going to be a huge advantage for Republicans who aren't just going to hide out and, do everything virtually anymore, but are going to safely and properly get back out there and continue talking to people.
You've talked a lot about states where redistricting is going to be key, but the Republican State Leadership Committee and some other Republican groups just spent a bunch of money in a primary in Alaska, trying to win back the Alaska State House. Beyond redistricting, how important is it that Republicans have these majorities in even deeply red states like Alaska? Yeah,
look, our number one goal is to help Republicans win in down ballot races. That's down ballot statewide races, and then, of course, legislative majorities. In Alaska, it's a great opportunity for us to get a governing Republican majority. We had great outcome in the primaries we got engaged in up there. There are some general election races we now have to be engaged in, but we've got a great chance of electing a Republican Speaker of the House in Alaska now, and that would be a chamber that we pick up. In a year that could be a tough one for Republicans, given how many chambers we have and how much we have to defend, any chamber like that we can pick up is important because we need good conservative policy anywhere we can get it. But I think the Democrats have become very cocky. I think they're way ahead of their skis. I think that they're getting comfortable with the lead that they think they had across the country. And I think the trends and what we're seeing just don't match the reality of their cockiness.
All right. And the last one for you here. We've seen both your side and the Democratic side raising just money hand over fist. Are donors tuning into these down ballot races in a way that they haven't before?
They are. We've raised more money than ever before. We've broken fundraising records every month, every quarter. We outraised our Democrat counterpart nearly 2-1. It's important that we continue to do that because on the Democrat side, they've got special interest groups and big donors who will stroke $1 million or $2 million checks at the drop of a hat and dump it into these down ballot races. You've got Barack Obama and Eric Holder who are on the other side raising money for redistricting. So they're focused on it. It's important that Republicans continue to focus on it. So we've been very pleased that even despite the challenges we've had with COVID, that we've had great success on the fundraising side. And I believe we'll have great success at the ballot box in November as well.
All right. Austin Chambers, President of the Republican State Leadership Committee. Thanks so much for joining us today. Bob, back to you.